The blazing sun beat down mercilessly as Clara Zimmerman watched in disbelief, as the stagecoach disappeared into a cloud of dust, leaving her alone in the vast Arizona desert with nothing but her carpetbag and the clothes on her back. The year was 1876, and Clara had just become another forgotten soul in the unforgiving terrain of the American frontier. Clara's throat burned with thirst as she stumbled forward, her pale blue dress already damp with perspiration despite the early hour. The Wells Fargo stagecoach had made an unexpected stop when one of the horses needed attention. The driver had assured the passengers it would take only a moment, so Clara had stepped out to stretch her legs. Before she realized what was happening, the coach lurched forward, the driver either not noticing or not caring that one of his passengers had been left behind. "Stop!" she had screamed, running after the coach until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. But the rumbling wheels had rolled on, carrying away her water canteen, her larger trunk, and any hope of reaching Gunnison, Colorado, where her aunt was expecting her. Now, with the coach long gone, Clara surveyed her surroundings. Miles of sand, rock, and scattered scrub brush stretched in every direction. The mountains in the distance seemed to shimmer in the heat, taunting her with their faraway presence. She had heard tales of the desert's dangers: scorpions, rattlesnakes, bandits, and worst of all, the slow death of dehydration. "Think, Clara," she muttered to herself, trying to ignore the panic rising within her. "You need to find shelter before midday." She calculated her chances. The stagecoach had been following the main trail north toward Colorado. If she stayed on this path, perhaps another coach or travelers would pass by. But how long could she survive without water? 4 hours later, the sun had reached its zenith. Clara's lips had cracked, and her once neat chestnut hair hung in damp strands around her face. The carpetbag had grown impossibly heavy, but she dared not abandon it. It contained all she had left in the world. She had left Philadelphia with dreams of a new beginning after her parents' deaths, but now she wondered if she would even survive to see her aunt's face. Clara stumbled, her knees hitting the hard, packed earth. A small cloud of dust rose around her, coating her throat and intensifying her thirst. She tried to rise but found she lacked the strength. As the edges of her vision blurred, she thought she saw movement on the horizon, a rider, perhaps. But it was probably just another mirage, like the pools of water she had been seeing for the past hour. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, she told herself. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her. Clara forced her eyes open to see a figure on horseback materializing out of the heat waves. The rider approached cautiously, and as he drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a man atop a dappled gray stallion. "Madam, you all right there?" The man's deep voice carried across the distance between them. Clara tried to answer but found her voice trapped in her parched throat. She managed only a hoarse whisper as she raised a weak hand. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion and approached her with measured steps. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and a faded blue shirt. A weathered hat shaded his face, but she could make out sharp features and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. "Name's Daniel Norwood," he said, crouching beside her. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, assessed her condition quickly. "Looks like you've been out here a while." Clara nodded weakly. "Stagecoach," she croaked. "Left me behind." Understanding crossed his face. Without hesitation, he reached for a canteen attached to his saddle and brought it to her lips. "Small sips now," he cautioned, supporting her head with one hand. "Too much too fast will make you sick." The water was warm but felt like heaven against her parched throat. Clara wanted to gulp it down, but Daniel pulled the canteen away after a few sips. "More," she pleaded. "In a minute," he promised. You've got to give your body time." He glanced at the sun, then back at her. "We need to get you out of this heat. My cabin's about an hour's ride from here. Can you hold on that long?" Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure if she could. Daniel seemed to read her doubt. "I'll carry you," he decided, gathering her into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man who looked so hardened by the frontier. He settled her onto his horse, then handed her the carpet bag and mounted behind her. "Lean back against me if you need to," he said, reaching around her to take the reins. "And have another small sip every few minutes." As they rode, Daniel kept up a steady stream of talk, perhaps to keep her conscious or perhaps because he sensed her fear of this stranger whose arms now encircled her. "Been ranching out here for 5 years now," he told her. "Came west after the war. Found this little stretch of land nobody wanted because of the lack of water. Ironic, isn't it?" He chuckled softly. "But I found an underground spring, built myself a cabin, got about 30 head of cattle now." Clara listened, drifting in and out of consciousness as the horse's steady gait lulled her. Occasionally, Daniel would remind her to take a sip of water, always careful to ration it. "What brings you out this way, miss?" he asked. "Zimmerman," she managed. "Clara Zimmerman." "I was heading to Gunnison, Colorado. My aunt lives there." "Gunnison? That's still a good ways north," Daniel replied. "Wells Fargo route," Clara nodded against his chest. "They'll realize you're missing at the next stop, might send someone back." His tone suggested he didn't think much of that possibility. "How far to the next town?" Clara asked, her voice stronger after the water. "About 2 days' ride," Daniel replied. "But don't you worry, I'll make sure you get there safely. First, though, we need to get you recovered." As they rode, the landscape gradually changed. The barren desert gave way to more vegetation as they moved toward higher elevation. Eventually, Daniel guided his horse onto a narrow trail that wound between rocky outcroppings. "Almost there," he said as they crested a small rise. Below them sat a modest cabin built of rough-hewn logs. A small corral stood nearby, and beyond that, a creek glinted in the late afternoon sun. A few cattle grazed on the sparse grass some distance from the cabin. "It's not much," Daniel said with a hint of apology in his voice, "but it's solid and dry." To Clara, who had been facing death in the desert just hours before, it looked like paradise. Daniel helped her dismount, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. He led her inside, where the cabin's interior was simple but neat. A wooden table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a narrow bed in one corner comprised the main room. A curtain partially concealed a smaller space that presumably served as storage. "Sit here," Daniel directed, guiding her to one of the chairs. He brought her a tin cup filled with fresh water. "Drink slowly." Clara obeyed, savoring each sip. As her body absorbed the precious liquid, her mind cleared and she became more aware of her situation. She was alone in a cabin with a strange man, miles from civilization. Under normal circumstances, this would be cause for alarm, but Daniel's actions so far had been nothing but respectful and life-saving. "Thank you," she said after finishing the water. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "No need for thanks," Daniel replied as he stoked the small fire. "Couldn't leave you out there. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes." "It wasn't my mistake," Clara said, a flash of anger at the stagecoach driver returning. "We stopped for a horseshoe adjustment. The driver said we'd be there a few minutes, so I stepped out to stretch my legs. When I turned around, they were already moving. I ran, but—" She trailed off, remembering the humiliation and fear. Daniel's jaw tightened. Some of these drivers care more about making their schedule than their passengers. It's not right. He moved to a small cupboard and took out some dried meat and biscuits. "It's not much, but you need to eat something." Clara accepted the food gratefully. As she ate, Daniel busied himself outside, tending to his horse and bringing in more firewood. When he returned, he carried a small wooden tub. "I thought you might want to wash up," he said, placing it behind the curtain. "I'll fetch some water and heat it for you. Then I'll head outside while you bathe." Clara felt a rush of gratitude at his consideration. "That's very kind of you." Daniel made several trips between the creek and the cabin, heating some of the water over the fire before filling the tub. When it was ready, he took a clean shirt and pair of trousers from a chest. "These will be too big, but they're clean," he said, placing them on the bed. "I'll be outside with the horses. Take your time." Once alone, Clara moved behind the curtain and gratefully peeled off her dusty, sweat-stained dress. The warm water was blissful against her skin, washing away the desert's grit. She used the simple soap Daniel had provided to clean her hair and body, feeling strength returning with each moment. The borrowed clothes were indeed too large, but she rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, securing them with a piece of string she found in her carpet bag. When she emerged from behind the curtain, she found Daniel had not yet returned, honoring his promise to give her privacy. She took the opportunity to look around the cabin more carefully. Despite its rustic simplicity, she could see signs of care in its construction and maintenance. Books lined a small shelf, surprising for a rancher in such a remote location. She recognized titles by Dickens and Twain among them. A movement outside caught her attention. Through the window, she could see Daniel talking softly to his horse as he brushed its coat. The gentleness in his actions contrasted with his rugged appearance, and Clara found herself wondering about the man who had saved her life. A knock at the door preceded his return. "May I come in?" he called. "Yes, please do," she answered, suddenly aware of how unusual their situation was. Daniel entered, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his clothes, but he quickly composed himself. "Feel better?" he asked. "Tremendously," Clara replied. "I don't know how to thank you for your kindness." "No need," he said again, moving to the fireplace to prepare a simple meal. "Anyone would have done the same." "I'm not sure that's true," Clara said softly. As Daniel cooked, they talked. Clara told him about her life in Philadelphia, how her father had been a professor of literature before his untimely death from pneumonia, followed shortly by her mother's passing from grief. With no siblings and few prospects in the East, she had decided to accept her aunt's invitation to come west. "Aunt Judith is my mother's sister," she explained. "She married a miner who struck silver in Colorado. When my parents died, she wrote that there was opportunity in Gunnison for a young woman willing to work hard." "What kind of work were you planning to do?" Daniel asked, serving her a plate of beans and salt pork. "I'm trained as a teacher," Clara said. "Aunt Judith said the town is growing and needs someone to teach the children." Daniel nodded. "Good teachers are scarce out here. Most towns would welcome you with open arms. And what about you?" Clara asked, curious about her rescuer. "You mentioned you came west after the war." A shadow passed over Daniel's face. "Served with the Union Army. After Appomattox, I couldn't see myself going back to Indiana. Too many ghosts." He paused. "Headed west with nothing but my horse and what I could carry. Worked cattle drives for a couple of years, saved enough to buy this land. And you're out here alone. Just me and the cattle," he confirmed. "Town's too far for regular visits. Get supplies every few months. Sometimes sell beef to passing traders." "It sounds lonely," Clara observed, then blushed at her boldness. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me." Daniel gave her a small smile. "It's honest, not presumptuous. And yes, it can be, but after the war the quiet suited me." They ate in companionable silence for a while. When they finished, Clara insisted on washing the dishes despite Daniel's protests. As she worked, she became aware of his eyes on her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a kind of wondering assessment. "What will you do tomorrow?" she asked as she dried the last plate. "Take you to the next town," Daniel replied. "Telegraph office there can send word to Gunnison that you're safe. They might be able to arrange passage on another coach." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the unexpected pang she felt at the thought of leaving so soon. "That's very generous of you to escort me." "It's the right thing to do," he said simply. Night had fallen, and the practical matter of sleeping arrangements needed to be addressed. Clara glanced nervously at the single bed. Daniel seemed to read her thoughts. "You'll take the bed," he said firmly. "I've got a bedroll I use on the trail. The floor by the fire will do me fine." "I can't put you out of your bed," Clara protested. "You're not putting me out of anything," Daniel insisted. "I've slept on worse during the war, believe me." As he prepared his makeshift bed on the floor, Clara settled onto the narrow mattress, wrapping herself in the clean, if worn, blanket. The events of the day caught up with her, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs. "Daniel," she said softly as he banked the fire for the night, "thank you again, for everything." He glanced over at her, his face half illuminated by the dying embers. "Rest now, Miss Zimmerman. You're safe here." Clara drifted into sleep with those words echoing in her mind, finding comfort in their simple truth. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window as Daniel moved about, preparing a simple breakfast. He had already been outside, judging by the fresh wood in the fire and the damp edges of his sleeves. "Good morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Hope I didn't wake you." "Not at all," Clara assured him, sitting up and trying to smooth her unruly hair. "I'm usually an early riser." "Coffee's hot if you'd like some," he offered. "And there's cornmeal mush. Not fancy, but it'll keep you going." "It sounds perfect," Clara said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and black, but after her ordeal, the warmth and stimulation were welcome. As they ate, Daniel outlined his plan for the day. "We'll head out in about an hour. Town's called Coyote Springs. Small place, but they've got the telegraph and a general store. Maybe a room at the boarding house while arrangements are made for your onward journey." Clara nodded, trying to ignore her reluctance to leave the safety of the cabin and this man who had shown her such kindness. "I'm ready whenever you are." "Thought you might want these back," Daniel said, holding up her dress. "I hung it outside last night to air out. The desert dust gets everywhere." Clara took the dress gratefully. Though clean, it still bore the wrinkles and strain of her ordeal. She disappeared behind the curtain to change, emerging a few minutes later feeling more like herself, though she found she missed the comfort of Daniel's oversized clothes. They set out as the sun climbed above the eastern horizon. Daniel had prepared his horse, and once again, Clara rode in front of him, her carpetbag secured behind the saddle. The day was cooler than the previous one, a blessing as they traveled through increasingly varied terrain. "How did you find me yesterday?" Clara asked as they rode. "That stretch of desert seemed so empty." "Was tracking a stray calf," Daniel explained. "Saw the dust from the road and thought it might be over there. Found you instead." He paused. "Lucky thing, too, another few hours in that sun without water." He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what would have happened. "Do you believe in fate, Mr. Norwood?" Clara asked after a moment. Daniel considered this. "Never gave it much thought. War taught me that some live and some die, often for no good reason, but finding you yesterday." He trailed off. "Maybe there's something to it." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun climbed higher, but the air remained mercifully cooler than the previous day. Daniel shared his water freely now that they were heading toward town, no longer needing to ration it so carefully. Around midday, they stopped in a grove of cottonwoods near a small stream to rest the horse and eat some jerky and biscuits Daniel had packed. Clara dipped her hands in the cool water, splashing some on her face. "Your aunt," Daniel said suddenly. "Will she be worried when you don't arrive on schedule?" Clara nodded. "Probably. I was due in Gunnison tomorrow. She'll be meeting the coach." A thought occurred to her. "I don't even know how I'll pay for another ticket. Most of my money was in my trunk on the Stagecoach." Daniel frowned. "The stage company owes you a free ride at the very least, plus compensation for leaving you to die." "I'm not sure how I'd prove it," Clara said. "It would be my word against the drivers." "We'll figure something out," Daniel assured her. "If nothing else, I can loan you the fare." "You've done so much already," Clara protested. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Daniel interrupted firmly. "You can send it back once you're settled in Gunnison if it makes you feel better." Clara studied him, this hard-looking man with the gentle heart. "Why are you helping me so much?" Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and clear. "Because it's what decent folks do." After a moment, he added more quietly, "And because I know what it's like to be alone in a hostile place with no one to turn to." Something in his voice told Clara he wasn't just talking about the physical desert. Whatever ghosts had driven him west after the war still haunted him, she realized. They continued their journey after the brief rest. As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself increasingly aware of Daniel's physical presence behind her, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in the arms that occasionally brushed hers as he guided the horse. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this awareness of a man, and not entirely unwelcome. The terrain gradually became less wild, with occasional signs of human settlement, a distant fence line, a worn trail intersecting their path. By late afternoon, Daniel pointed to a smudge on the horizon. "Coyote Springs," he said. "We'll be there before sundown." Clara felt a curious mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that she would soon be able to contact her aunt and resume her journey, disappointment that her time with Daniel was coming to an end. As they approached the town, the collection of buildings took shape, a main street lined with false-fronted establishments, scattered houses behind them, and a church steeple rising above it all. It was small by Eastern standards, but to Clara, after the emptiness of the desert and the isolation of Daniel's cabin, it looked bustling. Daniel guided his horse directly to a building marked Telegraph Office and General Store. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met briefly before he turned away to secure the horse. Inside the store, a bell jangled as they entered. A thin man with spectacles looked up from behind a counter. "Daniel Norwood," he greeted with surprise. "Don't often see you this time of month. Cattle drives not for weeks yet." "Special circumstances, Morris," Daniel replied, guiding Clara forward. "This is Miss Clara Zimmerman. She was left behind by the northbound stage yesterday. Found her out in the desert." Morris's eyes widened. "Left behind? By that new driver, Jenkins. I told Wilkes he was no good when they hired him." "Miss Zimmerman needs to send a wire to her aunt in Gunnison," Daniel continued, "and we need to find out when the next stage comes through." Of course," Morris said, reaching for a pad and pencil. "You can draft your message right here, miss. As for the stage, next one's not until Tuesday." Clara's heart sank. Today was Saturday. 3 days, Morris nodded apologetically. "They only run twice a week through here, unless—" He glanced at Daniel. "Wilkes himself is due in tomorrow with a private rig, bringing supplies from Santa Fe. He might take you on to Gunnison if he's heading that way." "He'll take her," Daniel said with a firmness that suggested he would make sure of it. And he'll do it without charging, considering his company nearly got her killed. While Clara drafted a brief telegram to her aunt explaining the situation and promising to arrive as soon as possible, Daniel spoke quietly with Morris about arrangements for her stay in Coyote Springs. Mrs. Holloway has a room at the boarding house, Morris told them. It's clean and respectable. $2 a night, meals included. Clara finished her telegram and calculated the cost 50 cents for the message, plus $6 for 3 nights at the boarding house. She opened her reticule and counted her remaining money, relieved to find she had just enough. As they left the telegraph office, Daniel led the way to the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building a short distance down the main street. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty road as they walked side by side. I'll speak to Wilkes when he arrives tomorrow, Daniel said. Make sure he understands his responsibility in this situation. You don't have to stay, Clara said, though part of her wished he would. I'm sure you need to get back to your ranch. Daniel glanced at her. The cattle can manage another day without me. I want to see this through. At the boarding house, they were greeted by Mrs. Holloway, a stout, gray-haired woman with a no-nonsense manner that softened when Daniel explained Clara's situation. Left alone in the desert, she exclaimed. Criminal, that's what it is. You come right in, dear. I've got a nice room upstairs and supper's nearly ready. Clara turned to Daniel. Will you join us for supper? He hesitated, then nodded. I'd be obliged. Mrs. Holloway showed Clara to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. Washrooms at the end of the hall, supper in 30 minutes. She paused at the door. That Daniel Norwood's a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but always fair in his dealings. Lucky he found you. Yes, Clara agreed. Very lucky. After Mrs. Holloway left, Clara took the opportunity to wash up properly and change into the one spare outfit she had in her carpetbag, a simple brown skirt and white blouse. She brushed out her hair and pinned it up as neatly as she could, suddenly conscious of her appearance in a way she hadn't been while surviving in the desert. Downstairs, she found Daniel waiting in the small dining room, his hat in his hands and his hair still damp from his own visit to the washroom. He had clearly made an effort to clean up, and Clara was struck again by how handsome he was when not covered in trail dust. Miss Zimmerman, he said, rising as she entered. You look rested. Thank you, she replied, noting the awkwardness that had fallen between them now that they were in civilization. In the cabin and on the trail there had been an easy companionship born of necessity. Here, social conventions reasserted themselves. Mrs. Holloway served a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. 2 other boarders joined them, a traveling salesman named Parker and a young widow, Mrs. Ellis, who taught at the local school. Conversation flowed around the table, with much of it focused on Clara's ordeal and miraculous rescue. It's unconscionable, Mrs. Ellis declared. The stage company should be held accountable. They will be, Daniel said quietly. I'll make sure of it. After supper, Daniel announced he would stay at the local livery stable where they had boarding rooms for travelers. I'll see you in the morning, he told Clara. Wilkes usually arrives before noon. Clara walked him to the door of the boarding house, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye even for the night. Thank you again for everything. Daniel nodded, seeming equally reluctant to leave. Lock your door tonight, he said finally. Town's mostly safe, but better to be cautious. I will. He hesitated, then awkwardly tipped his hat and turned to go. Clara watched him walk down the street until he disappeared into the growing darkness. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Clara found her thoughts returning repeatedly to Daniel. In just 2 days, he had gone from stranger to rescuer to what, Friend seemed too small a word for someone who had saved her life. Yet anything more seemed presumptuous given their brief acquaintance. Still, she couldn't deny the connection she felt to him, or the way her heart had quickened when his hands had lingered at her waist. She told herself it was merely gratitude and the intensity of their shared experience, but deep down, she suspected it might be something more. Morning brought clear skies and the bustle of a small town waking to Sunday. After breakfast with the other boarders, Clara found herself with time to spare before Wilkes's expected arrival. Mrs. Holloway suggested she might want to attend services at the local church. "Reverend Taylor gives a fine sermon," she said, "and it'll give you a chance to meet some of the townsfolk." Clara agreed, partly out of genuine interest and partly to occupy her thoughts. She wondered if Daniel might attend as well, though he didn't strike her as the church-going type. She was both disappointed and relieved when he didn't appear at the church. The service was simple but heartfelt, and afterward, several people approached her, having heard about her ordeal. Their concern and offers of assistance touched her deeply, as she walked back to the boarding house with Mrs. Ellis. The younger woman asked, "Will you be continuing to Gunnison tomorrow?" "I hope so," Clara replied. "My aunt is expecting me and I've already been delayed." "It's a nice town, Gunnison," Mrs. Ellis said. "Growing fast with the mines, they'll be lucky to have a trained teacher." "Do you enjoy teaching here?" Clara asked. Mrs. Ellis smiled. "I do. The children are eager to learn and the parents respect education. It's a good life, if sometimes lonely." She glanced at Clara. "And what about you? Any young man waiting in Philadelphia?" Clara shook her head. "No. After my parents died, there seemed little reason to stay." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you know Daniel Norwood well?" Mrs. Ellis's eyes twinkled. "Ah, so that's the way the wind blows. Can't say I blame you. He's a handsome man, and what he did for you was heroic." "It's not like that," Clara protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "I'm just curious about him." "Of course," Mrs. Ellis said, clearly unconvinced. "Well, he keeps to himself mostly. Comes to town for supplies every few months. Fought in the war, they say, though he never talks about it. Fair in his business dealings. Not much of a socializer, but respected." She paused. "There was talk a year or so back that the Miller widow was sweet on him, but nothing came of it." Clara absorbed this information, trying not to appear too interested. "He mentioned he's been out here 5 years. "That sounds right. Showed up one day, bought that patch of land nobody wanted and somehow made it work. Found water where others couldn't." Mrs. Ellis studied Clara's face. "He's a good man, but solitary, set in his ways." Clara wasn't sure why this assessment bothered her. Perhaps because she had seen glimpses of something else in Daniel, a gentleness beneath the rough exterior. A capacity for kindness that suggested he wasn't as solitary by nature as by circumstance. They reached the boarding house, and Clara excused herself to her room, ostensibly to rest before lunch but really to sort through her conflicted feelings. She was leaving tomorrow, heading to Gunnison and the new life she had planned. Daniel would return to his ranch and his solitary existence. Their paths had crossed briefly and would soon diverge again. That was the reality, yet she couldn't help wondering what might have been under different circumstances. A knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. Mrs. Holloway stood in the hallway. "Mr. Norwood is downstairs. Says he needs to speak with you." Clara's heart quickened as she followed Mrs. Holloway to the parlor where Daniel waited. He stood when she entered, hat in hand. Something in his expression told her the news wasn't good. "What is it?" she asked. "Wilkes arrived," Daniel said. "He's willing to take you to Gunnison, but not until Wednesday. Says he has business here that can't wait." Clara's disappointment must have shown on her face, because Daniel continued quickly. "I have another option to suggest. I'm heading back to my ranch this afternoon." It's roughly halfway between here and Gunnison. If you're willing, you could ride with me today, stay at my place tonight, and tomorrow I could take you the rest of the way to Gunnison." The offer took Clara by surprise. "You do that? Ride all the way to Gunnison?" Daniel nodded. "It's only fair. Get you there faster than waiting for Wilkes." Clara considered the proposal. The proper thing would be to wait for Wilkes, maintaining the proprieties. But the thought of spending 2 more days in Coyote Springs when she could be making progress toward Gunnison and spending more time with Daniel was powerful. "People might talk," she said, testing his reaction. "A woman traveling alone with a man she barely knows." "People always talk," Daniel replied with a shrug. "Question is whether you care what they say." Clara thought about her aunt's likely reaction. Judith had always been the more conventional of the 2 sisters, but she was also practical. Surely she would understand the necessity of the situation. "I accept your offer," Clara decided. "When do we leave?" Daniel's face relaxed into the ghost of a smile. "I've got a few supplies to pick up. Shall we say 2 hours? Give you time to pack and say your goodbyes." After he left, Clara explained the change in plans to Mrs. Holloway, who seemed concerned but resigned. "It's not what I'd advise ordinarily," the older woman said. "But given the circumstances and knowing Daniel's character, I suppose it's sensible enough, and you'll be in Gunnison that much sooner." Clara packed her meager belongings and settled her bill. At the appointed time, Daniel arrived with his horse and a mule he had purchased to carry supplies. "Thought the extra animal might make the journey easier," he explained as he helped secure her carpet bag. "You can ride the horse, and I'll lead the mule." They set out under the curious gazes of several townspeople who happened to be on the street. Clara felt a momentary pang of concern about her reputation, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of adventure. After all, what was more scandalous traveling with a respectable man who had already proven his trustworthiness, or being abandoned in the desert by a negligent stage company? The journey back to Daniel's ranch was more pleasant than their earlier ride. Clara sat properly on the saddle rather than sharing it, and the pace was leisurely. They talked more freely now, the initial barriers between them continuing to dissolve. Daniel pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early days in the territory. Clara told him more about her life in Philadelphia, her teaching experiences, and her hopes for Gunnison. "You have a real gift for making a person feel at ease," she observed as they stopped to water the animals at a small creek. Daniel looked surprised at the compliment. "Do I? Most folks find me standoffish." "I think perhaps you're out of practice with company," Clara said, "but it comes naturally to you." He considered this. "Maybe. Before the war I was different, more sociable." He stared at the flowing water. "War changes a man. In what ways did it change you?" Clara asked gently. Daniel was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Made me wary of attachments. When you've seen so many friends die, you start to think maybe it's easier not to have them in the first place." "That sounds lonely," Clara observed. "It is," Daniel admitted, "but it's safer." "Safer isn't always better," Clara said softly. Daniel's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the connection that had formed despite his wariness of attachments. The moment stretched, intimate and charged, until Daniel finally looked away. "We should get moving," he said. "Want to reach the cabin before dark." They continued their journey, the conversation turning to lighter topics. As the day wore on, Clara found herself studying Daniel's profile when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out hints of auburn in his dark hair, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had once smiled more freely. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, the familiar structure a welcome sight after the long ride. Daniel helped Clara dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. He busied himself with the animals while Clara went inside to rest. The cabin felt different now, no longer a strange shelter in a crisis, but a home with character that reflected its owner. Clara moved about the space, noticing details she had missed before. A carefully whittled chess piece on the shelf, a faded daguerreotype of a young couple who might be his parents, a pressed wildflower marking a page in one of the books. When Daniel entered, he found her examining his small collection of books. "Not what most would expect from a rancher," he said, sounding almost embarrassed. "It tells me you value knowledge and stories," Clara replied. "That's a good thing." Daniel shrugged. "My father was a school teacher. Always had books around. Guess some habits stick." He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire. "Hope you don't mind beans and bacon again. Not much for fancy cooking out here." "It sounds perfect," Clara assured him. "Can I help?" Together they prepared a simple meal, moving around the small space with an ease that belied their short acquaintance. As they ate, Clara asked about the books that had most influenced him. "Always had a fondness for the last of the Mohicans," Daniel admitted. "Something about the frontier spirit spoke to me even before I came west." He hesitated, then asked, "And you? What do you read when you're not teaching others to read?" "Poetry, mostly," Clara said. "Wordsworth, Keats. Their words transport me to places I've never been." She smiled. "Though none of their flowery descriptions prepared me for the reality of the desert." "No, I don't imagine they did," Daniel agreed with a small smile of his own. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the conversation flowing naturally between them. Daniel spoke more of his childhood in Indiana, of his father's dedication to education and his mother's quiet strength. Clara shared stories of her own parents, her father's absent-minded brilliance, her mother's love of music and art. "They sound like good people," Daniel said when she finished. "You were lucky to have them, even if not for long enough." "Yes," Clara agreed softly. "I was." As the fire burned down to embers, the practical matter of sleeping arrangements arose again. Clara felt a flutter of nervousness, though she knew Daniel would be as respectful as before. "You'll take the bed again," he said, confirming her thoughts. "I'll be fine by the fire." "Thank you," she said, rising, "for everything." Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering light. "We should leave early tomorrow if we want to reach Gunnison by nightfall." Clara moved to the bed, suddenly acutely aware of his presence in the small cabin. As she settled under the blanket, she watched Daniel prepare his bedroll by the dying fire, his movements efficient and practiced. "Daniel," she said softly, "I'm glad the stagecoach left me behind." He looked up, startled. "You're glad you almost died in the desert. I'm glad we met," she clarified, "even if the circumstances were dire." Daniel was still for a moment, then nodded slowly. "So am I." Sleep came slowly for Clara that night, her mind full of conflicting emotions. Tomorrow she would reach Gunnison, begin the life she had planned. Yet a part of her had begun to wonder if that life was still what she wanted. They set out at dawn, the morning air crisp and clear. Daniel had packed provisions for the journey and made sure Clara was comfortably settled on his horse before mounting the mule himself. "It's about 8 hours to Gunnison at a steady pace," he told her. "Terrain gets rougher as we head into the mountains, but nothing the animals can't handle." As they rode, Clara found herself committing everything to memory, the way the light filtered through the trees, the sound of the wind in the grass, the distant call of birds. Most of all, she tried to memorize Daniel, his voice, his expressions, the way he sat tall in the saddle despite the long hours of riding. The journey took them through increasingly beautiful country as they gained elevation. Forests of pine and aspen replaced the scrubby vegetation of the lower elevations. Streams ran clearer and colder. By midday, they had a view of snow-capped peaks in the distance. "Those are the San Juans," Daniel explained during a brief rest. "Some of the highest mountains in these parts." "It's magnificent," Clara said, awed by the vastness of the landscape. They continued after their rest, the trail narrowing as it wound through the foothills. Daniel led the way, occasionally glancing back to make sure Clara was managing the increasingly difficult terrain. "Not much further now," he called back as the afternoon wore on. "Should be able to see the valley soon." Sure enough, as they crested a ridge, a view opened before them of a broad valley with a river snaking through it. Nestled alongside the water was a collection of buildings that could only be Gunnison. "There it is," Daniel said, reining in beside her. "Your destination." Clara stared at the town, trying to summon the excitement she had felt when planning this journey. Instead, she felt a heaviness in her chest at the thought that soon she would say goodbye to Daniel. "It looks lovely," she managed. They descended into the valley, the trail widening into a proper road as they neared the town. Signs of civilization increased: fenced fields, occasional farmhouses, and finally the outskirts of Gunnison itself. It was larger than Coyote Springs, with several proper streets lined with businesses and homes. A church spire rose above the other buildings, and the buzz of activity suggested a prosperous community. "You know where your aunt lives?" Daniel asked as they entered the town. Clara nodded. "She said her house is on Spruce Street near the school." They made inquiries and were directed to a neat two-story house with a small garden in front. As they approached, the front door opened, and a woman in her 50s hurried out, her face a mixture of worry and relief. "Clara, thank heavens." "Aunt Judith," Clara called, dismounting with Daniel's assistance. The women embraced, Judith holding Clara at arm's length to examine her. "When you didn't arrive on the stage and then that telegram came. I've been beside myself with worry." "I'm fine, Aunt Judith," Clara assured her. "Thanks to Mr. Norwood." Judith turned her attention to Daniel, who had dismounted and stood respectfully to one side, hat in hand. "Mr. Norwood, I cannot begin to express my gratitude. To think what might have happened if you hadn't found my niece." "Just fortunate I was in the area, madam," Daniel replied. "You must come in," Judith insisted. "Have a meal at least. I want to hear everything that happened." Daniel hesitated, glancing at the setting sun. "Thank you, madam, but I should find lodging for the night. It's getting late." "Nonsense," Judith declared. "We have a guest room. You'll stay with us tonight and start fresh in the morning." Daniel looked to Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "Please, Daniel, it's the least we can do." He relented, and soon they were settled in Judith's comfortable home. Clara was shown to a room that had been prepared for her arrival, larger and more luxurious than she had expected, with a real bed, dresser, and even a small writing desk by the window. "It's lovely, Aunt Judith," she said as she washed up before supper. "We want you to be comfortable here," Judith replied. "This is your home now." She paused, then added with a knowing look, "Your Mr. Norwood seems like a fine man." "He's not my Mr. Norwood," Clara said quickly. "He saved my life, that's all." "Of course," Judith said, unconvinced. "Well, he's welcome to stay as long as needed." Supper was a pleasant affair, with Judith's husband, George, joining them. He was a hearty man with a booming laugh who seemed genuinely interested in Daniel's ranching operation. "Always need good beef in a growing town," he declared. "If you ever consider expanding your herd or need investors, I'd be interested in discussing possibilities." Daniel seemed surprised by the offer. "That's generous, sir. I'm small scale at present, but I'll keep it in mind." As the meal progressed, Clara found herself watching the interactions. seeing how easily Daniel conversed with her relatives when given the chance. He wasn't the antisocial hermit some in Coyote Springs, believed him to be just a man who had chosen solitude out of caution rather than preference. After supper, George invited Daniel to the study for brandy and cigars, a clear sign of acceptance. Left alone with her aunt, Clara braced for questions. "Now," Judith said as they cleared the table, "tell me everything, and I mean everything." Clara recounted the full story of being left behind, her rescue, and the journey to Gunnison. She tried to be factual and dispassionate, but something in her voice must have revealed her feelings, because Judith's expression grew increasingly knowing. "You care for him," she said when Clara finished. It wasn't a question. Clara considered denying it, then sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you well," Judith assured her. "And perhaps to him, though men can be remarkably blind to such things." "It doesn't matter," Clara said. "He'll be leaving tomorrow and I'll be starting my new life here. Our paths crossed briefly, that's all." Judith regarded her thoughtfully. "Is that what you want? For your paths to diverge?" The question caught Clara off guard. I don't know. We barely know each other. Sometimes a few days can tell you more about a person than years of casual acquaintance," Judith observed. "Your uncle and I knew after 1 week that we were meant to be together." Clara stared at her aunt, surprised by this revelation. "I didn't know that." "Your mother thought I was scandalously impulsive," Judith said with a smile. "But 25 years later I have no regrets." This gave Clara pause. Even so, Daniel values his independence, his solitude. Does he? Or is that simply what he's grown accustomed to? Judith asked. "Sometimes people build walls not because they want to be alone, but because they're afraid of being hurt if they allow others close." Clara thought about Daniel's comments about the war, about attachments being dangerous. Perhaps. "The question is," Judith continued, "are you willing to test those walls?" Later that evening, Clara stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit garden. She could hear the murmur of male voices from the study downstairs, occasional laughter suggesting that Daniel and her uncle were getting along well. Judith's words echoed in her mind. Was she willing to test Daniel's walls? And if so, how? She was a woman in a time and place where forwardness in matters of the heart was frowned upon. Yet she sensed that if she didn't make her feelings clear before Daniel left, she might never have another chance. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Daniel standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Sorry to disturb you," he said. "Just wanted to say good night. I'll be heading out at first light tomorrow." "So soon?" Clara asked, unable to hide her disappointment. "Best to get an early start," he said. "It's a long ride back." Clara nodded, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, she said, "Would you walk with me in the garden for a moment? I'd like some fresh air." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." They made their way downstairs and out through the kitchen door to the small garden behind the house. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the dark sky. They walked in silence for a few moments, following a gravel path that wound between flower beds and a small vegetable patch. "Your aunt and uncle seem like good people," Daniel said finally. "They are," Clara agreed. "I think I'll be happy here." She paused. "Though I'll miss certain things." "What things?" Daniel asked, his voice low in the darkness. Clara gathered her courage. "The quiet of your cabin. The way the light filters through the trees. Your company." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was hard to read. "Clara, I know it's forward of me," she rushed on, "and perhaps unwelcome. But before you leave, I wanted you to know that these past few days have meant a great deal to me, more than just gratitude for saving my life." Daniel was silent for so long that Clara feared she had offended him. Then, softly, he said, They've meant a great deal to me as well. Then why leave tomorrow? Clara asked. Stay a few days, get to know Gunnison, get to know me better. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I've built a life that makes sense to me, he said. A life where I don't have to worry about losing people I care about, where I'm not responsible for anyone's happiness but my own. And is it a good life? Clara challenged gently. Are you happy, Daniel? He looked away. I'm content. Content isn't the same as happy, Clara said, stepping closer to him. I think you've been hiding from life, not living it. Daniel's eyes met hers, a flash of something, anger, fear, longing crossing his face. That's presumptuous of you. Yes, Clara admitted, it is. But I think it's also true. They stood in silence, the tension between them almost palpable. Then Daniel reached out, his fingers lightly touching her cheek. You're a remarkable woman, Clara Zimmerman. And you're a remarkable man, Daniel Norwood, she replied, her heart racing at his touch. One who deserves more than contentment. Daniel's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. And what if I don't know how to be anything but what I am? Then we could find out together, Clara whispered. The moment hung between them, fraught with possibility. Then, slowly, Daniel leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but deepened as Clara responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly. Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I should leave tomorrow, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Or you could stay, Clara countered. Just a few days. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, a few days. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the night air suddenly sweeter, the stars brighter. At the foot of the stairs, they paused. Good night, Clara, Daniel said softly. Good night, Daniel, she replied. I'll see you in the morning. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Clara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. She knew there were no guarantees Daniel might still choose to return to his solitary existence, and she might find that their connection couldn't withstand the test of time and circumstance. But for the first time since boarding that stagecoach in Philadelphia, she felt truly hopeful about the future. The next few days passed in a whirl of activity. Judith introduced Clara to the town, taking her to meet important citizens and showing her the school where she would teach come fall. Daniel accompanied them sometimes, other times exploring Gunnison on his own or engaging in lengthy discussions with George about potential business opportunities. To Clara's delight, Daniel seemed to be opening up more with each passing day. He joined conversations more readily, even laughed occasionally at George's jokes. When he spoke of his ranch, there was a pride in his voice that suggested he cared deeply about the work he did. On the third evening of Daniel's stay, they all attended a small gathering at the home of the town's mayor. Clara wore her best dress, the one that had remained safely in her carpet bag during her desert ordeal, and was pleased to see Daniel had acquired a new shirt and had his hair trimmed at the local barber. You look very handsome, she told him as they walked to the mayor's house. And you look beautiful, he replied, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. Though I have to say, I thought you looked beautiful even covered in desert dust. The gathering was pleasant, with the mayor's wife taking a particular interest in Clara's teaching experience. Several of the town's prominent citizens made a point of welcoming her to Gunnison, and by the end of the evening, Clara felt she had made a good impression. What surprised her most, however, was how easily Daniel conversed with the various guests. When the conversation turned to ranching and beef prices, he spoke with authority and insight that earned him respect from the other men. When Mrs. Mayer discovered his knowledge of literature, she was delighted and engaged him in a lengthy discussion of Dickens. Your Mr. Norwood is quite the dark horse, Judith commented as they prepared to leave. So much more than the solitary rancher he appears to be. Yes, Clara agreed, watching as Daniel thanked their host. He is. Later that night, as they walked home under the stars, Daniel seemed thoughtful. Your aunt and uncle have been very kind, he said. Made me feel welcome. They like you, Clara replied. Uncle George is particularly impressed with your knowledge of cattle breeding. Daniel nodded. He's made an interesting proposition. Wants me to consider partnering with him on a larger ranching operation. Says there's land available closer to Gunnison that would support more cattle. Clara's heart quickened. Are you considering it? I am, Daniel admitted. It makes good business sense. The railroad will reach here within a year or two. Beef prices are likely to rise. With proper investment, a larger operation could be very profitable. And Clara hesitated, then pressed on. Would there be other benefits to being closer to Gunnison? Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Clara, I've been thinking a lot these past few days about what you said in the garden about contentment versus happiness. And, she prompted when he paused. And you were right, he said simply. I've been hiding, not living. These few days here with you, with people who have welcomed me despite barely knowing me, have shown me what I've been missing. Clara squeezed his hands, hardly daring to hope what his words might mean. Daniel, I can't promise I'll find it easy, he continued. Being around people, opening myself up to caring deeply again, but I'd like to try. His eyes held her steadily. With you, if you're willing. Joy bloomed in Clara's chest, warm and bright. I'm more than willing. Daniel's smile, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face, was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then I'll speak to your uncle tomorrow about his proposition. Clara stepped closer, sliding her arms around his waist. And what about tonight? Tonight, Daniel said, lowering his head to hers. I'd very much like to kiss you again. I'd like that too, Clara whispered just before his lips met hers. The kiss was different this time, more confident, more passionate, full of promise rather than hesitation. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. We should get back, Daniel said reluctantly. Before your aunt and uncle send out a search party, Clara laughed, feeling lightheaded with happiness. Yes, I suppose we should. As they walked the remaining distance to the house, hands entwined, Clara marveled at how drastically her life had changed in just 1 week. What had begun as a terrifying ordeal, being abandoned in the desert, facing almost certain death, had led to this moment of perfect joy. Over the next few weeks, plans took shape rapidly. Daniel and George formalized their business partnership, with Daniel contributing his existing herd and expertise, while George provided capital for expansion. They purchased land 15 miles outside Gunnison, with good water access and grazing. Daniel made one trip back to his old ranch to collect his remaining belongings and arrange for the cattle to be driven to the new property. Clara missed him terribly during the 10 days he was gone, but the separation only confirmed what she already knew, that her feelings for him were deep and genuine, not merely the product of their dramatic first meeting. Upon his return, Daniel surprised her by presenting her with a small wooden box he had carved himself. I made this during the evenings at the old cabin, he explained as she admired the intricate pattern of leaves and flowers on the lid. Thought you might like something to keep special things in. When Clara opened it, she found a pressed desert flower inside, the same type that had been growing near where he had found her. It's beautiful, she said, deeply touched by the gesture. Like you, Daniel replied. Then, to her astonishment, he dropped to one knee before her. Clara Zimmerman, I know we've known each other only a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Clara's hands flew to her mouth, tears of joy springing to her eyes. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, I will." Daniel rose and took her in his arms, his kiss sealing their promise to each other. They were married 2 months later in the Gunnison church, with Judith and George standing proudly beside them. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, already having embraced Clara as their new schoolteacher and warming to Daniel as a respectable businessman and rancher. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers, the station master approached them with news. "That stage driver, Jenkins, the one who left you behind, Mrs. Norwood," he corrected himself with a smile. "He's been dismissed. Company couldn't ignore what happened, especially after Mr. Wilkes came through and heard the full story." "Good," Daniel said firmly. "Actions should have consequences." "Indeed they should," the station master agreed, "and sometimes those consequences are surprising." He grinned. "If he hadn't left you behind, you two might never have met." Clara squeezed Daniel's hand. "Everything happens for a reason, I suppose." Later that night, in the small house they had purchased near the school, Clara stood by the window looking out at the starlit landscape. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked softly. Clara leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "None," she assured him. "You?" "Only that it took me so long to find you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Clara turned in his arms to face him. "I was thinking about that moment in the desert, when I thought I was going to die. How strange that the worst moment of my life led to the best." Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I think that's how life works sometimes. We have to go through the desert to find what we're truly seeking." "And what were you seeking?" Clara asked. Daniel's answer was simple and heartfelt. "You, even though I didn't know it yet." As they began their life together, the desert ordeal that had brought them together became a story they would tell many times to friends, to the children who eventually joined their family, to grandchildren years later. But privately, between themselves, it was more than just a story. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be, and how precious their time together was. 5 years after their wedding, the Norwood Ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, with Daniel's innovative breeding methods producing cattle particularly well-suited to the Colorado climate. Clara continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas after Daniel's father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and eventually a second son, James. Clara never lost the sense of wonder she felt when looking out at the western landscape that had nearly claimed her life, and instead had given her a love she never expected to find. And Daniel, though he sometimes still needed solitude, never returned to the isolation he had once thought was his only option. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Daniel took Clara back to the spot in the desert where he had found her. They rode out at dawn, just the two of them, and reached the location as the sun climbed high in the sky. "It looks different," Clara said, surveying the landscape that had once seemed so hostile. "It is different," Daniel replied. "Or maybe we're different." They shared water from the same canteen he had offered her that first day, the simple act a reminder of how far they had come. "Thank you for finding me," Clara said, looking into the eyes of the man who had become the center of her world. Daniel's smile, now freely given and frequent, warmed her heart. "Best thing I ever did," he said, drawing her into his arms. "Best thing I ever did." As they rode home together, side by side, Clara reflected that sometimes life's greatest journeys begin with a single moment of crisis, a stagecoach pulling away, a solitary figure appearing in the desert heat, the simple act of sharing water with a stranger who would become everything.